And we have a conversation between Ashwin Mahalingam and Mr. Sonam Wangchuk, who needs no introduction to our alumni and people out here. Mr. Sonam Wangchuk is a mechanical engineer by education, and he's a founder and has been teaching innovation at the Students' Educational and Cultural Movement of Ladakh, which he founded in 1988, which is an alternative school, where together with the students, he designed and built solar heated buildings that are low cost, made of earth, mud, and maintained at around 15, but even the at 15 plus 15 degrees centigrade, even when the outside temperature was minus 15 in Ladakh winters. As we all know, Sonam Wangchuk has been granted with several awards and titles, and the prestigious Raman Magsaysay Award in 2018. Thank you, Sonam, for joining us today. And in conversation with Mr. Sonam, we have our own Dr. Ashwin Mahalingam, an alumni and faculty from IIT Madras. He's been in IIT Madras since 2006 as a faculty, passed out in 1998 as our alumni. Over to you, Ashwin, for a exciting session.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lata, for that kind introduction. And Sonam, it's a pleasure to have you with us at Sangam this year. I know you've been traveling quite a bit, so thank you so much for making the time. I think, as Lata said, Sonam needs no introduction to this audience. I mean, he's an innovator, very passionate about education, an engineer, all of that rolled into one. What I'd like to do, Sonam, is for the next 15, 20 minutes, engage in a conversation over a series of issues with you. And then hopefully the last 10 to maybe 12 minutes, I'd like to see if we can take some questions from the audience, because I know this is going to be a very popular session and there are probably going to be a lot of people with questions. So for those of you who are listening in, please do send in your questions and we will try to see if we can make some time to take as many of them as possible. So, welcome again. Sort of, I know you do a lot of very, very interesting things, innovate, you're very passionate about social reform, all of this. Could you start off by telling us a little bit about what you're doing currently? What's occupying your time these days?
Thank you. Can you hear my voice and all fine, Ashwin?
Yes.
Okay. Well, greetings to all the audience right now. I'm really happy to be addressing all the young, spirited people of IIT and beyond. Yes, these days I've been generally working on for the armed forces, doing new experiments. So, as you would know, a lot of army presence enhanced in Ladakh with all the tension on the border. So, part of what I've been recently doing is to make rapid construction techniques for shelters and bunkers and residences and offices for the military, which will be very highly efficient in thermal performance, solar heating. While we have been doing that for now some 30 years, now we are more focusing on its prefabrication, so that you have solar heated earth-built buildings, which used to be slow motion rather, relaxed way of construction. Now we are working on prefabricated ones that can be assembled in a matter of weeks and do not need any heating for weeks and have a long autonomy, which means that even if it is cloudy for several weeks, it should stay warm, which is where we were a little weak. When it is sunny, it is wonderful. It is good for a week also, but now we are working on extending this period of time. Secondly, we are working on how the same passive solar heating can be used for other livelihood focused things. For example, cows that give milk and dairy producers in all cold regions, definitely in Ladakh, but most of North India, they become much less productive during the winter, because it's so cold that, being warm-blooded animals, they have to maintain their body temperature also, and all the food they eat goes into that, and there's very little milk that comes out. Now we have been experimenting with cow sheds that are solar heated, which is a good gesture to another living being, the cows, but also very good for the productivity of the cow, because when you use solar heating for things like warmth, a cheaper source of energy rather than their feed, then you can double their milk productivity. This is what we have observed at our school, but now we are trying to standardize this and research properly. So these are some of the things I'm involved with these days.
Thanks. Wow, this sounds fascinating, Sonam, and it actually segues very nicely into the first set of ideas that I wanted to talk to you about relating to innovation. And what you've told us is squarely in the middle of what we would call highly innovative engineering and design. So, we are in the midst of a pandemic at the moment. We have a few other sort of macro events going on. I think there is climate change that is a specter that hangs above us. And, there is one school of thinking that sort of says that when you're in a crisis, that is probably one of the best times to sort of innovate, because you need new solutions to get out of where you are and into the new normal. So from your perspective, looking at all of this, where do you see some key avenues for innovation, both now and in the near future?
Well, as all students would know, one of the fields where things are changing, where things haven't changed for decades and centuries, are now finally changing, is education. So I see education as one, and secondly, lifestyle. I'll come to that later. But in education, things have not changed for a long time while the world around was changing. When I would visit IITs and other institutes 1 year ago, professors would keep telling me that nowadays students don't take interest, they are not very enthusiastic in the classroom and so on. And I would say, well, things have changed, and you might deliver a lecture on a topic, but there are 100 other lectures available by world's best communicators on the same topic with illustrations, animations, and so on. So maybe they don't find their own class teacher all the time as interesting. And sure enough, with the pandemic, it opened it to that world of digital communication. And so I see that our teachers, our professors would be best as good curators of learning, not as the source of learning. Source, yes, but somewhat indirectly as the facilitator or the curator who brings the best of contents from all over the world and presents it to the students. That would be one part. But again, digital alone is not enough for true learning to happen. It can happen only when you actually touch things in real life, solve real problems, connect with real people, collaborate with others. And for that, the schools and institutions will still be needed, but not for the same old purpose of, delivering the key content or core learning part through lectures. So I see that this will leave things change forever and change for better. In that we will continue to use digital learning for the concepts and using the best of lectures in the world and animation and so on. I think very soon, rather than blaming students for not taking interest, the lessons will become so interesting. There'll be organizations that will come with movie-like content. They should be as interesting as movies are to children or students, or games are. So that kind of change will happen on that supply side. And secondly, I think schools will change their role into becoming live labs, where these students and teachers come not for lectures, but for application, hands-on. So their role will be more important than ever. Schools are not going to go away. They're going to do what no internet can do. So this is where I see a huge, very positive change coming. Secondly, talking of innovation, we talk of gadgets and consumer products and so on coming out every week, many new ones. But I think COVID has taught us that if we live simply, we can live happier. You can see how the rivers became sparkling clean, the air became so blue, the sky became, and so on. Only if we use less of cars, less of our machines, and so on. So I want to hope and believe that this will also change the way we look at life. It's not about consuming more and more to keep happy, but rather living simpler lives, which enables other living beings also to live. As we in Ladakh, if some of you know, last year, even before the COVID, launched a movement called the I Live Simply movement. This was mainly because our glaciers were melting away in Ladakh due to climate change, and farmers were facing water shortages. And I'm sure at coastal areas you have submersion problems. So the answer has to come from lifestyle and behavior change. So therefore, we said that we can't fix these water issues with artificial glaciers like ice stupas. We have to change the lifestyle of people in big cities around the world. So I want to believe that COVID pandemic will leave us with a lesson on living simpler lives so that all beings simply live. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Sonam. I think those are two very provocative set of ideas that I think open up a variety of vistas for us to think through. I want to sort of take both in turn, maybe talk to you a little bit about education and then also about the whole living simply movement. With regards to education, I really like this idea of, professors or teachers becoming, receptacles of curating knowledge, and the students, learning more actively rather than just reactively sitting and writing down notes. But in the short term, with the pandemic and the fact that students cannot go to school, both at the school level as well as the college level, I mean, we have the same issues at IIT as well. How do you see us being able to effectively deliver education over, say, the next year and a half as we transition into the new normal?
Yes, transitions are always difficult, but even during this period, I think it can be better than if it is about lectures that used to be delivered in lecture halls. Then I think it can only be better, because not only can we have our professors' lectures, but we can have them, if they are very clever and good, they can have all kinds of other possibilities thrown at us in the form of, various links to great content on the web or so on. Search, explore, and bring what is available that illustrates your points much better than you can do with a blackboard or just words. So I want to believe that our professors, our teachers, lecturers will adapt to the situation and make the most of what internet has. Actually, we had these even before the pandemic, but somehow we were too fixed with our ways of doing with the blackboard and so on. So this has shaken us out for a good reason, and there's such a treasure to be discovered on the internet. I think students have already discovered and they were already hooked to this. It's only the professors who perhaps were somewhat not as exposed as students were to these content on the internet. So very soon, within a year or so, I'm sure entrepreneurs will rise to the occasion and prepare content that are, as I said, movie-like, that are engrossing. So if students forget their lessons, let's make their lessons unforgettable, is how I say.
Okay, fascinating. We will certainly can't wait for that to happen. Wanted to move very quickly to the other thing that you spoke about, the living simply movement. And again, I think it's it's a great vision, but you're talking about massive cultural change, right, across demographics, across the geographical spread of the country. And that is a very difficult proposition. How do you see that potentially happening? Because I do agree that the pandemic has changed our behavior in some way. But, if you look at, recent happenings, it looks like people are reverting back in some way to some of our old ways of traveling and commuting and so on. And therefore, how do you see us being able to accomplish the kind of cultural change that you envision for us to live more simply, consume fewer resources? And will that potentially have an effect on the economy if you actually produce less? What are your thoughts on this?
So yes, I think this is a great opportunity to use. 2 years ago, I could find it difficult to believe we could do it, but with the pandemic shaking us from the roots, I see some possibility. This is a very good time to reflect, introspect about life on Earth itself. We talk of economy, we talk of 8% growth, and we are unhappy about 6% growth or zero or negative. But this is a time when advocates of harmony on the planet should bring before people the lessons about how we have lived. We talk of 10%, 8%, or 5% growth. Imagine what we have been doing to the rest of nature. Let me give you some data. WWF, Worldwide Fund for Nature, very respected organization, came up with this report that between 1972 and 2012, just 40 years, the wildlife population of the planet went down to 48%. Half of wildlife was obliterated, eliminated, evaporated. And we are worried about our 8% and 10%. Because of our lifestyle, half the population of the deer and the bees and the rabbits and the same with plants are evaporated. So we have to understand that it's not just human beings who have a prerogative on this planet. In fact, if we are not careful about others, even human beings will be eliminated from the planet. So for these deer and the bear and the elephants, I think we have been a much worse virus than corona is for us. Corona has a mortality of 3%. We have caused 50% devastation to them. So I want to believe that we come out with this learning and learn to live not self-centered, anthropocentric, as they call it, human-centric lives, so that we remove everything. And then we'll realize that if bees are gone, if the bees are gone, our agriculture will fail, human population will fail, and finally be reduced to 50% or something. But it's much better to learn beforehand. And this is important for our education system to transform itself into not the same production, consumption, preaching that started with Industrial Revolution. We are 300 years into the consequences of Industrial Revolution. So it's best if we learn from that and change the inputs that we give to our education machinery. If we put in the same things, we'll get the same results as Einstein is supposed to have said. Something has to change if we want to change how we live and how other beings live on this planet.
So just on that. Yeah, so I think, first of all, I think that statistic is scary, that we've actually obliterated 50% of non-human life, plant, animal of the planet. But it seems to me that, yes, one, we have to teach people differently, but also, our accounting systems, for instance, don't account for the depletion of elephants and rabbits and whatever else you were mentioning. And our regulations on the one hand, I mean, we do have environmental laws, but they may not be as strong as we might want them to be in order to safeguard against the eventuality you're talking about. So it looks like the change needs to happen at multiple levels, at the level of the government, organizations, education. How do you see that? I mean, do you agree? And if so, is there sort of a roadmap that we can think of on how these things would change?
I don't know about a roadmap yet, but I'm thinking that something fundamentally has to change about our economics. Right now, our progress, success is all based on economic growth or money, which comes to, say, gold, which is where the concept of money started. So it's based on something that we possess and consider valuable, which was taken as gold. I think in the future, gold is great of value and all that, but for the 21st and 22nd century, more than gold, life is the most precious thing, and life is oxygen. Death is CO2. CO2 is like death to the planet, death to the beings. So we have, I sometimes play with, I haven't come to a clarity yet. Maybe some of you can help. Maybe we have to switch to our, monetary valuations based on carbon. How much carbon we produce. Any act that produces more carbon should be punitive, should trigger a punitive action. So it should be more based on oxygen and carbon dioxide balance than something like gold. Because when it comes to elimination of life itself, it's a sad thing to see our best of our innovators thinking of going to Mars, escape the Earth, use and throw the Earth. I am a believer of rescuing the Earth rather than, sort of brain drain, planetary brain drain we are now talking about. It's much better to set the environment right on the planet and change the fundamentals of our economics so that activities that lead to life and better environment are more rewarding economically also. And that will happen when it is not based on money or gold, but based on these elements like CO2 emission is what should be something like carbon credit, but extended beyond. And you must have seen, and I'm sure many of you participated, I Live Simply movement started an interesting fund-based crowdfunding. Now, in this crowdfunding, it's not money. Money is based on gold. Our crowdfunding is based on CO2, what I'm talking about, and new economics. So you make pledges. There you contribute in pledges to use bicycles rather than cars, trains rather than aeroplanes, or vegetarian rather than meat eating. All these are oxygen oriented, carbon dioxide, reduction. So you can make huge contributions. Right now, it's just a game-like thing. You can look up at ilivesimply.org. When you choose to plant a tree, it is like donating $500. When you choose to use bicycles, it's like $1,000 contribution. But that dollar is based on this carbon dioxide oxygen balance, not gold. So therefore, you can, for the planet, contribute a lot without actually giving this gold-based money. It's just a concept.
Yeah, thanks. I think I've also come across some ways in which ecosystem services are valued, but I think it's certainly something that we'll have to sort of look at more closely. But with regards to this whole saving the earth kind of idea, in the past, we've had a lot of innovators come up with very sustainable ideas in terms of building materials, for instance, where you reduce deforestation, transportation, all of those kinds of things. You spoke about some, very appropriate technology-related examples right at the beginning of this chat. But for a variety of reasons, these don't seem to scale rapidly, and we seem to go back to, for instance, from a construction perspective, using very energy-intensive cement, concrete, all of that. How do we get some of these ideas and innovations to scale?
So there are two parts. One is ignorance and apathy on the part of users. They can see that they don't know that the sun can help you live happily in a place like Ladakh, which is polar climate, without paying any fuel bills, polluting, or using machines. Yeah, ignorance. The second part is that even if one is aware, it is not rewarding. It doesn't punish you to use cement, concrete, which is one of the most energy-intensive building materials you can imagine. It's from lime, fired at 1600 degrees or so. So imagine all the fuel that goes and carbon dioxide is released, but no punishment. That is rewarded. You let them do it as if there's no tomorrow. On the other hand, if there was a carbon economics, then such activities like mining of cement or lime to make cement will be punitively placed in the economics, and using earth, soil, naturally occurring right under your feet and abundant for all, rich or poor. There's nobody so poor who cannot use earth under their feet or sun over their heads. So there has to be also some systemic change. But before that, we can already do with awareness and dispel ignorance. So, for example, people in Ladakh can save so much money on fossil fuels and health hazards because of the pollution by just going solar, as we have done for 30 years now. So the first level is just awareness. The second level is more intricate. It has to be built into the economics that these are punishing, these are rewarding. So that's what I meant. Carbon is punishing, oxygen is rewarding.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you for those ideas. I just have one more short question, and then I'd like to sort of move over to see if we can answer a few questions from our audience. There are probably more than 1,000 people listening to this right now, and most of them, and many of them are alumni of IIT. You've already given us one potential suggestion, trying to work to figure out how we can enumerate the economics of carbon and actually bring that into economic valuations, balance sheets, and so on. But other than that, any thoughts on where this larger IIT alumni community could potentially help with some of the ideas that you're espousing?
Well, generally, engineers are innovative. One thing that engineering education does is makes you into a problem solver, a rational, logical thinker. So you would be better able to understand the problems and seek and propose solutions. And because of your standing and status, there'll be more takers to do that. So it's a sort of a duty upon us to become advocates of a more harmonious lifestyle on the planet. Yeah. And then secondly, we have to live by example. So people who are clever, who are intelligent, who are well off, have an extra added responsibility to show that I have all the money in the world, but I choose not to buy 21 pairs of shoes. I mean, we all engineers also learn economics in our first year. I think you all also do. One of the best lessons in economics for me was the law of diminishing returns. Law of diminishing returns tells us that when you buy your first pair of shoes, it gives us infinite satisfaction because we had no shoes and all the pains, and suddenly we have a pair of shoes that protects. Satisfaction is 100%. But when we buy our second pair of shoes, the satisfaction is much less. Third, fourth, 20th and 21st hardly give us any satisfaction. So we should understand that from that. Now to the law of diminishing returns, I add a little Indian touch. And I say, don't stop buying pairs of shoes, even if it is the 21st. But don't buy it for yourself. Buy the 21st or maybe the 11th for somebody who has no pairs of shoes, and that person will get 100% satisfaction. Vicariously, you will be breaking the laws of economics to get that satisfaction indirectly from that person. 12th, you give to somebody else who doesn't have a pair of shoes. 13th, 14th, you will be infinitely happy. By which I mean is make all the money you want, but don't spend it on yourself. Beyond 3 meals and 3 pairs of clothes, it causes more stress than any peace. So give it to others, and that will be more effective for the people to see how IITians or successful engineers are. Now, talking of success, I really like what we find in our Indian traditions. Yeah, I'm very touched by what Buddha said 2,500 years ago about success. We all want to become a success and show off our success. So he changes the definition of success and says, for a human being, it is a greater success to conquer a single desire than to fulfill 1,000 desires. So our friends from New York and London are engrossed in this path of satisfying desires to be successful. Whereas the Indian philosophy is different. It is to overcome desires. When you say after your third pair of shoes, I don't need a fourth, that's a greater success than to say I want 30 more. So that's what I would like them to do.
Thanks for those reflections, Sonam. We have a few minutes, so I'd like to see if we can move over and take a few questions from our audience. Lata, can I ask you to ask a few questions that our listeners have been sending in?
Yes, please. So here it says, can you please share one thought which keeps you strongly motivated as a sustained thinker and innovator? And who are the people and things that you find this inspiration from?
Um, well, I try not to be inspired by one personality. It's always dangerous, people being human beings. You never know when they
Yeah,
cease to be an
everybody.
inspiration and then you are down. So I always like to take inspiration from multiple sources, say, simple people in a village who lives with very little and is so happy. I mean, I just 2 weeks ago, my inspiration was this 86-year-old man in Himachal across the Atal tunnel, the newly built tunnel, who had a very tiny shop, but I think he was much more happy than some of our billionaires. And happiness, some people say, is reality minus expectation. So he had very little expectations, and the reality, even if it is small, because the expectations are small, happiness level is very, very high. Compared to a billionaire who wants to make his, you know, value doubled, he's much more rich. So this man said, my secret of happiness is I don't desire more. I keep doing things. I never sit still. I'm in the field doing things. And he was in top of his health, glowing at 86. So those people inspire me more than so-called successful billionaires and top leaders and so on. But many of them.
Yeah, thank you. So, what's your view of having human values as a core subject in education and integrating it with all other subjects in schools and universities?
Definitely. I think that is one of the key things. But the problem is that such things as human values cannot be taught or lectured by a teacher in a classroom. So again, teachers can only be facilitators or curators. It will have to be from the world around, and the teachers can be role models. Only if they are will we learn. So this is very, very important. And one of the best things I found in my engineering education, for example, was the humanities in the first year, where we learned about ethics and economics and law of diminishing returns. I got in that one year. And these, along with ethics and so on, balances us. Otherwise, we'll just become tech monsters who will always try to throw tech at all problems, and the world doesn't work like that. So definitely human values have to be a very important part of the education. It's not just about making livings and livelihoods. It's about living happily and harmoniously, where this is more important than just means and materials after an extent.
Thank you so much. That's really
we have
lovely.
one more question, Lata,
So
maybe
what's,
before we'll have to wrap up,
yeah,
I think.
yeah. So, what's your message to the old people, that is seniors in India, about innovation and how they can contribute?
Well, I would say keep your curiosity alive. You are never old if you are still, thinking and curious about things. You could be 80, but you are still young. If your curiosity is dead, you could be 18 and still old. And let young people do their things. Don't cast them into social taboos and what conventionally is done and not done. Just let young people do what they think. Give them advice, but don't bind them, because elderly people have a role to let the new generation take over, but they can be great guides, friends and philosophers. That's the role they should play. Things change and nothing is permanent. So don't hold on to the past and not let the new take wings. So that's what I would say. Thank you.
So, Sonam, thank you so much. I think this conversation could go on for a long time, because I have a number of things that I want to talk to you about, and I'm sure there are a number of other questions. But unfortunately, we've come to the end of the allotted time. But I think the message that you've left us with is a very powerful one, which is, I think perhaps we should rethink in the new normal what our goals should be. And maybe one of those goals should actually be to live in harmony, as you put it, with our surroundings, both the environment and society, and perhaps to use technology to achieve this harmony. Seems to be essentially, I think, what you're telling us, and I think that has a lot of merit, something that we should really think about. And I was just thinking that when we talk about Atmanirbhar, we talked about Atmanirbhar normally at the level of the country, but perhaps we should also look at Atmanirbhar at a much lower level, perhaps even at the level of ourselves. So thank you so much for bringing in this perspective. It's been a pleasure being able to speak to you. So thank you so very much for your time, and all the best with all the great work that you're doing. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, all of you, and wish you a great new year. That's much better than other years. You all would make it great, even if it is not. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And Sonam,